Hi, and welcome to another 3D Studio Max training video. My name's Gavin, a lot of you know me as Gavin B off CG Talk, and today what we're going to be looking at are some more basics of MaxScript. We're just basically going to quickly cover if statements and case statements. Now, if and case statements are basically ways of testing a specific value or an expression, and depending on the results of the test that we do, steering the program or the script in a different kind of direction and executing different commands. What we're going to take a look at firstly is a case statement. A case statement is similar to an if statement, however, rather than having to keep testing a specific expression for a specific value, and if that one isn't right, doing exactly the same again but to a different value, we can present a list of cases to 3D Studio Max or MaxScript, and only the case that matches our expression's results will actually be evaluated. I think really the best way to kind of get to grips with case statements is actually to go ahead and create one. So what we'll do first is we'll just start up MaxScript, and the way that we're going to test a case statement is we're going to use a user interface. On the interface we're just simply going to put a spinner and a button. When the user clicks the button, it will test the value of the spinner, and depending on the value in the spinner, it will steer again the program in a different kind of direction and execute a different command. So what we'll do first is just create a basic window. So we'll do rollout, and we'll just call this internally my role, and we'll give a caption of case test will be perfectly fine. And while we're down here, we'll just call the create dialog function, pass it the rollout name, my role, just to tell it that we want to make a dialog box out of this rollout. And we need to obviously specify a width for it, and we'll give it a width of 200, and we'll give it a height of 75. Okay, now what we need to do is just go ahead and put some controls on the dialog. The first control that we want is the spinner. We'll just simply call this S1 because we don't need a more relevant name, because it really wouldn't be relevant to anything in the script. So we'll give this a caption of pick a number. I think what we'll do is just give this a range of 0 to 2, because we don't really need to go through a huge case statement. We'll just go through a small one. So again, we'll use 0 for the minimum, 2 for the maximum value, and then we'll use 0 for the default value. So it can be a number between 0 and 2, but it will start off at 0. What we also need to do is tell it that we want it to be an integer, because it's going to be a lot easier on this one dealing with whole numbers rather than numbers with decimal points. Now, if you haven't seen the first video, I'm not sure what this code is. Basically, just take a quick look in the MaxScript reference just to find out what parameters can be passed to rollout controls, and what each one actually does. We'll then go ahead and create a button. We'll just call it B1, and we'll just give this a caption of press me. Okay, so if we go ahead and just evaluate this, you'll just see a nice simple dialog box, and a spinner that can just go between 0 and 2, and a button. Obviously, as you can see, when we click the button, it doesn't actually do anything, which is our next job. We need to tell 3D Studio Max that when the buttons are clicked, we actually want to perform an action. So we use the on, and we need to pass the name of the button then to B1. So on B1 being pressed, do. And we'll just use the open and close brackets to specify the block of code that would be executed. So again, as in the previous video, it's very simple. It just is specifying that on button 1 being pressed, do this block of code here. Okay, so now we need to specify the commands that need to be executed once the button is pressed, and this is where the case statement comes in. So we'll just go through the actual layout of the case statement. We use case. We then need to tell it what we're going to be testing in this case statement. So in this, we're going to be testing the spinner value. So that's just s1 dot value. Okay, so we're saying case the actual case that we're testing is s1.value. We then use of, and the open and close brackets as always. So we're saying here, in case, take the case of this value and pick one of the following. So the first value that we will get is 0. Okay, and that is literally all you do to present a case to 3D Studio Max to actually test against. Is because it's a number, we literally just put the number we want to test. We then put the colon to tell it whatever comes after will be the expression that we want to execute, or the block of code that we want to execute. So we'll then have the open bracket, and now we'll do this all on one line because we don't need to go over multiple lines. We're only going to be executing one command, and that command is message box. And what that'll do is literally just pop a box up with an OK and cancel button and a message in it. And the message that we want to give is we'll use too small for 0. The next value we want to test against is 1, so the next case is 1. So if it's 1, we want to give a message box saying, we'll pick just right for this one. And the next one is 2, so we'll use message box again and give it a caption of too big. So we're saying if it's the case that these two numbers match, 0 and value of S1, we want too small. If the second case, which is 1, is successful, we want to execute a message box saying just right. And if it's 2, we want to execute a message box saying too big. Now with cases, not specific in this kind of scenario here because our spinner only has a range of 0 to 2, so it can't be anything outside that. But if it was in a scenario where it could be, we had a maximum of 3 and we only had these 3 cases here. So if we changed the range to 3 there, that would give us a possibility of 4 scenarios. It could be 0, 1, 2 or 3. You can actually use default. What default does is the case statement will execute this command, this case if none of these others are met. So if the spinner was set to 3, if we left this at 3, but we didn't have a case for it, it would actually just execute default or whatever came after default. But because we don't need it, we'll just take it back out again. Okay, and that literally is it. That is a case statement. What we could now do is file, evaluate all. We'll leave the number at 0 and we get a message box saying too small. Change it to 1, we get a message box saying just right. And finally, number 2, too big. Okay, so you can see that works just as it should do, and we get the relevant message every time, no matter what number we go up and change to. Okay, you see I left it at 3, I didn't go back and change it to 2, so nothing actually happens at the moment when I press the button. If we'd left the default in there and put a message box saying pick a different number or something, if I had it on 3 and clicked press me, because the case 0 didn't match, the case 1 didn't match, and the case 2 didn't match, the default case would then be executed. Okay, what we're now going to take a look at is just a brief look at if statements. An if statement basically is used to conditionally execute an expression based on the results of a Boolean test. Now, for those that don't know, again, a Boolean is basically a value that can only have 2 states. So it could be true or false, it could either be on or off, it could be 0 or 1, but it couldn't be anything else. It can only have 2 states. So essentially, if the statement returns true when we do a test, MaxScript evaluates and proceeds with the expression. Else it moves on and does carries on with whatever code comes after. Okay, so again, what we'll do is use a similar bit of code from like we just did a second ago, and we'll use if statements this time. Okay, and once we've done that, we'll actually just take a look at some of the other features of an if statement. Okay, so we'll again make a rollout, my role, caption of if test. And again, while we're down here, we'll just call the create dialog function and pass it the name of my role. We'll give it a width of 200 again and a height of 75. Okay, and again we'll go ahead and create the spinner, which we will call S1 again. Pick a number as the caption. Again, help if I could spell. We'll give this one a range of, I'm going to give this one a range of 5. So we'll go from 0 to 5, default as 0. And again, we want this one to be of type integer. We only want to deal with whole numbers. And again, a button B1, press me. Okay, so again, we've just got the simple dialog with caption of if test, pick a number with a spinner that goes 1 to 5, and press me. Okay, the reason that I've gone with 5 for an if statement is just because there are a few different things I want to show you with if statements and the tests that we can actually do on the value. Okay, so again what we need to do is tell the 3D Studio Max that on button 1 being pressed, we want to do this code. Now, we saw if statements previously in the first video, so you know roughly what the layout is. We would do if, we then have a test. For this test we'll do if spinner1 value is equal to, and remember the double equal signs means equal to. 1 equal sign will set the value, 2 equal signs will test the value. So if it's equal to 0, we then use the then command. Okay, and I'm just going to do this with blocks of code, just simply for the fact that we did with the case statements. So if S1 value is equal to 1, then we'll have a message box pop up. And in the message box we'll just have a caption saying 0 is small. Okay. What we can then use, as we did in the first video, is else. In the first video we actually just put else and then another block of code. We didn't do any further tests simply for the fact that again we had a spinner that only had 2 values. Okay. But this time we can actually put an if statement after here if we wanted. So else if s1 dot value, so if the value of s1, and this is something different that I want to show you. I don't want to test 0 again because we've already tested 0. So what we'll do is use the greater than sign, just a forward arrow, just greater than. So if the number's greater than 0, okay, and remember I said you can do more than one test? This is where that comes in handy. The if statements basically can be made a bit more complicated, okay, and you can complicate them using and. So what we're going to say here is else if spinner 1, the value of spinner 1 is greater than 0 and the value of spinner 1 is less than 3, then execute the following block of code. Okay, and we'll just do a message box saying and test. So just something that we know what it is. Okay, just quickly I'll show you what happens here. Okay, so if we've got the value 0 and I hit the button, we get a message box saying 0 is small. That's because this statement here has returned a true value, so it is it has been successful. We've tested this value and it has come back that yes, that value is equal to 0, so we've executed this block. If I change it to 1 and hit press me, we get and test, and that's because the value is greater than 0, so it's not 0, it's bigger than 0, but it's also less than 3. So then this statement here is actually returned true, and this one here is returned false. So this one is wrong, this one is right. If I change it to 2, we also get AND test, because this statement here is perfectly valid, but this one isn't. It's definitely not equal to 0, but 2 is greater than 0, but less than 3. If I then change this to 3 and hit the button, nothing happens, because the value definitely isn't 0, and it definitely isn't. It definitely is greater than 0, but it's definitely not greater than 3. It's equal to 3. So if we go up again, 4 and 5, nothing happens. Okay, so we could then really come here again with an else if s1 dot value. Trying to think what we can do here is not equal to 4. Just quickly, this little here exclamation mark and followed by an equals means not equal to. That is not equal to. Not equal to. You can't use that by itself. You have to use it as 1, so it's not equal to 4. And s1 dot value is greater than 2. And we can use another AND in there then AND s1 dot value is less than 6. Okay, let's go ahead and see what happens to them. Oh, what have I missed out? Oh, yeah, that's it. I've actually missed out quite a bit there. Then I actually need to go through and put all of the brackets in. So message box, the long test, file, evaluate all. So 0 will return 0 is small, 1 will return AND test, 2 will return AND test, 3 returns the long test because it's not equal to 4. It is greater than 2, but it's also less than 6. So 4 will actually return nothing, because we get here and we see that 4 is definitely not equal to 0. We'll see that 4 is greater than 0 but isn't less than 3. And straight away down here we see that the value is equal to 4, so this here is what returns the false. It's not equal to 4. We don't want anything equal to 4. So as soon as 4 is present, it won't work. But obviously this would have returned true, this part here, the greater than 2 and less than 6, but unfortunately because this part doesn't match. But if we go up and hit on 5, we get the long test, because it's not equal to 4, it is greater than 2, but it's also less than 6. Okay, so you can see how you can build up quite complicated if statements just from this small block of code. And it really does have many kind of uses when you're doing user interfaces and just general Mac script really. In a later video that we'll be doing a render effect, we'll also be using if statements in there, and you'll just see how useful they can actually be just in everyday use. Take for example the script that we created the other day, and we actually used an if statement then. We had it in this for loop here, but as we've already covered case statements, you can actually see here that we can actually just change this if statement into a case statement. So we'll put case in here. We've got rad buttons.state, so it's the state of the radio buttons, which was I believe, if I remember rightly, yep, it would have been 1 or 2, so it would either have been a box, which is 1, or a sphere, which is 2. So we don't need this test in here anymore, and we have case, the state of, and we need to then tell it what we're testing. So if it's 1, we wanted to make a box. Okay, we can then get rid of all of this in here, we can get rid of the else, we can get rid of this extra open bracket, and we can literally just go in now and amend this. If it was 2, we wanted to create a sphere. So you can see again in some situations the case statements will produce a much smaller block of code than an if statement, but you don't have the flexibility of the test. You can only do these single stated cases. And again, it doesn't actually have to be an integer. You can test strings, booleans. You can really test anything that you would normally be able to test anywhere else. So now we've executed that, we'll just see how it works with the case statement instead of an if statement. We'll make 3 boxes. We've got 3 boxes, and we'll make 4 spheres. We now have 4 spheres. So you can see that it works just as quick and just as effectively, but it's a little bit neater when you're just doing something simple like this. So in the next video, as I said before, we'll be creating a render effect. We'll just take a look at changing an image after it's been rendered, pixel by pixel, and then later on in the video, some later videos, we'll be taking a further look at user interfaces and creating and using them, and we'll also be taking a look at scripted custom attributes for objects, but we'll get into that in the later videos. Okay, thank you very much then, bye.